Did you know that there are hundreds of thousands of deck lists available on the internet that you can search through? In this quick video, I'll show you how to make the best use of public database tools while deck building and brewing for your next tournament. What is up, vintage gamers, and maybe just Magic gamers, as this video will apply to any format. I'm going to show you how to use some tools to better produce quality deck lists and answer lots of your questions revolving around: have cards been played before? Is my idea unique? Is there anything I can do to have a better starting point while deck building? So where I am on mtggoldfish.com. This is a website that has a variety of different things related to Magic the Gathering, including, articles and card data. One of the things it has, and my favorite, is this deck search feature. So this is an archive of tons and tons of deck lists that were published on the internet. And the tournaments they come from do vary between, formats and that kind of thing. But they house tons and tons of publicly available deck lists on this website, and you can search through them to find answers to your questions. And so I like to use, sometimes I'm on this metagame page and I can use this advanced search options field over here for deck search, or you can just go up here and go decks and deck search. So what are we doing here? We're going to use these parameters that we're given to narrow the search fields to try to help us answer some kind of question that we would pose. So for instance, if I want to see, what kind of Bazaar of Baghdad decks are being played in Vintage recently, it's very simple, right? So we're going to check select vintage format. The second thing is we're going to unselect user. Now, this is a pretty important one. If you keep user selected, it will show anyone who has created a deck on this website. So this website has some deck building tools that would allow you to make your own list. And it's going to show those all if you keep it clicked. And you typically don't want to see everyone's every deck list from ever. What you really want to do is start with tournament deck lists and refine from there. So we're going to unselect deck list. We're going to unselect user. We're not going to put any player in. Let's just say, what have we been what kind of Bazaar decks have been played over the last, I don't know, how about a month? So we'll do 803 to 903, and we're going to add the card Bazaar of Baghdad. And now we can select, how many. Most of the time it will be 4, but let's just say we want it dedicated 4 of Bazaar of Baghdad in the main. Now you can add more card filters or less card filters, but let's just start with 4 Bazaar Baghdad and hit search. And what you'll find here is over the last month, we have 46 posted deck lists that have 4 Bazaar Bagdads in them. And now this is really helpful because this is basically anything that anyone's been playing with 4 Bazaar Bagdads in the last month. And now the next important thing is determining what kind of data you're looking at. And so what you need to really be able to do is tell from this source field the level of competition that you're looking at. So here we have Vintage Challenge. Vintage Challenge is a Magic the Gathering online tournament, and it's one of the higher level Magic the Gathering online tournaments. You'll also see other things like Vintage Preliminary, which is like a medium level, and then Vintage League, which is the lowest level. A league can be played by anyone, and it's only going to show you 5-0 deck lists. So what you can do is, if you're really wondering, like, where is this data actually coming from, you could go to this list here. Let's go to this list. This is a dredge list from a Vintage Challenge. It went 3-3 and placed 26 in this event. And you can actually see the source over here. And so you could click that and you can see, wow, this is from MagicTheGatheringOnline.com. This is their official, tournament export for the Vintage Challenge on September 2nd. So here is where you got all the deck list information. This is where all the deck lists came from. Basically, what MTG Goldfish does is they run a bot, they run a script on this website, and they scrape this website for data. They take all of this information that would be in the website's code and then put it inside of their database, which lets us then search it, which is a really, really useful tool. So I just want to make sure you understand that Vintage Challenge, Vintage Preliminary, and Vintage League are all Magic Online events. And for the most part, if you're looking at vintage deck lists, you're almost only going to really see Magic Online events in here. But that's not always the case. There are certainly other events that pop up. Here we see a vintage 1K 15 card proxy event. And if you go see where did this come from, this is coming from MTG Melee. So this is a paper event that was played pretty recently in tabletop. And this data got exported and scraped and pushed on to MTG Goldfish's website. So for vintage, what you're really looking for are these Magic Online results, and then sometimes you'll get some other results along the way. If you are specifically looking for paper, typically the Goldfish doesn't get all of the paper results. It usually only gets ones that are coming from Melee. So there's another website called MTG Top 8. This one has a lot less deck lists than Goldfish does, because I don't think it scrapes quite as frequently or as much. But what it does have is it has, I believe, user-submitted deck lists from paper events. So you can see here there's a Hurricane Weekend 2023 in Houston, Texas. This is a paper vintage event that came from the stonesmtg.com. I'm not actually sure that link is going to work. But this is a paper vintage event that had 24 players. And this event you won't find in this database, but you will find in this database. So there's like there's some push and pull here. And this database can be a little bit more useful for, some kind of like older events and looking at older data. So if say you wanted to look at like Eternal Weekend data for vintage over forever, this actually has a lot of deck lists. You can see if you go back to 7 here, we have Eternal Weekend 2011 main event, and it has some deck lists from that event, and from Madrid in 2010. So there's a lot of interesting things here in terms of historical paper data. There are, of course, other websites that are like this. I'm just going to show you these two, and I'm just going to show you a lot of some use cases on MTG Goldfish. But I wanted you to be aware that what you're looking at, what data you are sourcing from, is definitely important, and what kind of outcomes you're gonna find. So here we do see that we have mostly online data, which I think is typically a good thing. Online data, online vintage is the most played, a place where the most vintage is played, and also the place where people have access to all the cards. Obviously, the decks, the vintage tournaments in paper are getting more and more proxy friendly, but you really have the full breadth of the format when you play online. So what else can we do with this tool? We have all kinds of these options. And now this isn't like the best parameter search field. If you had your own database, you could do a lot more specific things, but you can kind of shortcut things here. So I believe one thing that someone talked about recently on MTG, the Discord, the Vintage Discord, you can find that link in the description of this video. Someone asked me, how many Underworld breaches do typical breach list and vintage play? And that's a kind of question that you can actually find for yourself without having to ask, me. So if you were to go, I want to see Underworld breach lists that have at least one copy that have been played. Let's go over the last year. That seems like a good time frame. Over the last year. So in the last year, Underworld breach list, how many things do we have? So you can see here that you have 392 results. Now, if I were to say make the same query, but restrict it to having only deck lists that have 2 copies of Underworld Breach, then what happens? So down here, we have 246 results. So from that, how many deck lists played one Underworld Breach. You take your first 300 and however many it was, minus 246, and that's the number how many breach lists played that. And so from there, you can do the same thing for 3, 35, and for 4, probably none. I hope none. I don't know if I've ever seen a 4 breach list. But from there, you can actually make a result number. Oh, there is a 4th. I kind of want to see it. Asian Vintage Paper Championships. Eternal Weekend. Let's just take a quick peek. I want to see. Wow. 3 Hercule Master Wizard, 4 Underworld Breach, 2 Grinding Station. 1 and 4 though. Unfortunate result for our friend here. But from there, you can actually find out over the last year how many of each public deck list played how many breaches, and from there you can see what is the norm. What are most players doing? And now this isn't going to give you 100% accurate representation of what most players are doing, because you have to think about the source data, right? You are only looking at online deck lists, mostly online deck lists from vintage leagues where the only deck lists published are 5.0s and only usually one or two of the same deck list are published. And then from vintage challenges, one of the things you should be aware of is that they only publish the top 32 decks. So a lot of the time, there's maybe 50 players in a tournament, but only the top 32 are published. So you're missing some amount of data there. And then for preliminary, they're only showing you the 3.1s and the 4.0s. So really, you are getting a data snapshot of some of the decks people are playing. But from there, you can maybe extrapolate, a kind of an average. And so there's an easy example question. Which decks are playing how many of what card? Another thing that I would like to do when I use this database is if I have an idea, I'm thinking, let's see, has anyone ever played, we can do this in two ways. You can do one for like newer cards and one for like older ideas. So let's say, hey, I love this 4th Aeolingus card. This card looks so cool. Has anybody been playing in Vintage? And so you could go in and you could get 4th Aeolingus, and then you could just hit search and you can see, hey, here's a bunch of example deck lists using the card. So this Unlucky Monkey, this name appears a couple times. Let's go check this list out. And boom, you have a vintage deck list. Look, a 10th plays in a vintage challenge, and it is playing the card that I'm interested in 4th Aeolingus. And that actually brings me to another point, which is when you're looking through this data, it helps to know what pilots and what players are very powerful and which players are doing very well. And that will help you gain, let you go to a deck list that you find was more likely to be succinct and playable and well constructed. So for a Jeskai, obviously Unlucky Monkey, that's a name that you see in lots and lots of Magic Online results. You could even specifically go say, I really want to see, what deck Unlucky Monkey's been playing recently, because I know this player does super well. So over the last year, what did I do wrong? Oh, sorry. I went to deck name. You want to go to player name. Look, we're learning. And then you can actually see all the deck lists from them. You're like, I really want to know what that I'm actually level 1 guy's up to. What's he doing? And you can see all kinds of lists that are published. So again, you're only seeing, lists that I did well in a preliminary or placed top 32 in a challenge or 5-0 to league with, but you can actually see what kind of decks you're up to. So this player function is actually pretty important when you're starting to try to narrow down what you're looking for. And that's another really good use case here is, say I am a Hogak player and I want to see what lists I want a new Hogak list so I can go on Magic Online. So let's go look at what recently people have been playing, and from there, if you have the knowledge of which players are proficient in this archetype, and this is something you can ask in Discord, on Twitch. Hey, if I wanted to find if I wanted to see a good list for a Hogak deck, who should I go look at? And you see, and people will probably tell you, people like Montolio, Sun-Q, that's a good one, Mad Max, Fire Truck. All these players are known for their Hogak play, and so you can be more assured that the list you're looking at is viable. Obviously, like a placement in a tournament helps as well, but the player name is totally a tool you can use to push together decks. So I kind of strayed from my original point, which is we were going to just see what cards are being played in a list. One of the things, like I said, is when you're brewing, some people brew in different ways, but for me, I want to see all the information I can, because let's face it, when you're building a Magic the deck, you are almost never going to have a truly original idea. The scope of Magic is so large and so wide that there's almost always going to be someone who has had the idea before you and has data you can pull from. And so I'm trying to think of a good example. Let's say, let's go. Hermit Druid is a good one. Hermit Druid, now that's a card that historically has been good in Vintage, but people don't, you don't really see it anymore. And you're just like, I really feel like this Hermit Druid interaction with Thassa's Oracle is going to be super powerful. I wonder what other people have done in the space. And so when you go to Hermit Druid, you're actually not going to pull up a ton of lists, but you're going to find some lists. And this is actually great because what you can do is you can bring up all these lists in new tabs and see what other people are doing. What is other people doing differently, right? And you can actually just gain a bunch of different perspectives on how to accomplish, a brew that you're trying to do. Here you see this player putting together this Green Sun Zenith natural order package. Oh, maybe that's an interesting way to use Hermit Druid. Or I put together this one here that was a little bit less. So maybe I saw this list and thought, oh, that was a cool idea, but maybe it has a little bit too much going on, and we made it a more blue-based, smaller natural order package so we could play Atraxa. And then you go here and you see, oh, Hermit Druid, that's less than a 3 cost. We could play it in a Lurrus deck, and so you have a more of a Lurrus centric build, and so on and so forth. And what you can really do is just gain a ton of data into making your first cut at a brew. And you might pick up card interactions there that you never even thought about. Like, it's, obviously, Hermit Druid's a green creature, but do we really want to play 4 mana for a natural order? Maybe. But maybe that didn't occur to you when you first put together your Hermit Druid list, right? And so these kind of things, you can actually just gain a lot of information that will help you in your deck building process. The same is true for any kind of card. Survival of the Fittest is a good one. This is a card that doesn't see too much play in Vintage anymore, but has seen tons of play in the past. You can actually see, ooh, I guess this is a good example of the data. Your output is only as good as the data that goes in. So you can actually see, unfortunately, some tournaments have Canadian Highlander inside of your Vintage results. And I think the reason that this happened at the time is because it's an MTG Melee. So it was scraped from MTG Melee, and it looks like the tournament organizer in this event had set the format to be Vintage instead of Canadian Highlander. So you end up with bad data in here, which is something to be aware of course. But here you can actually see like any Vintage Championship. We can go take out, look at this. This is a Survival of the Fittest mono green Bazaar of Baghdad deck. Very, very cool. And you can kind of see what people are trying to do with the card. And I think another thing that is really, really cool is how far back this database goes. So if we were to set this number, let me try to go as far back as possible. Let's just go 2012 and hit search. And we go, let's say we go to, near the end. We're seeing data as far back as 2018. I think that's around where the data typically ends up stopping. It's like 2017, maybe 2018. But you can see historical data here. So you're seeing a Vintage League. So it's a little bit, a little bit different name than the normal Vintage League because it was a long time ago. But this is a 5-0 list that's, it's playing a Toolbox, Survival of the Fittest package, splashing red. And what you can do here is reference historical lists, right? You can find out how this card has been played over time. And so if you see, in 2018, people were doing this. Looks like people were doing this a lot in 2018, and then they probably stopped. Here, say let's jump to 2020 and let's see what's different by 2020. Okay, this list is a little bit more defined, a little bit more blue action in this one. You can see ancestral, deep analysis, different kind of takes on the archetype. And we can really reference all kinds of old data. And this is something I do for videos all the time. When I'm brewing, it's very unlikely that I'm just going to pick up a brew that no one's ever thought of. What I'm going to do is, find a card interaction or a historical deck or a deck list from another format and see how it works inside of this format. Something I would do a lot is I'll go to decks and I will go to popular decks in the metagame, and I'll go to something like Legacy or some kind of format that is close to Vintage, something like Legacy or Commander or something. And I'll see if I can find any interesting interactions there. So like, oh, wow, this is a pretty cool cephalid breakfast list. I wonder if anyone has ever tried this in Vintage before. So you could be like, let's see if there's any cephalid illusionist lists. Because this is not a Vintage deck. This has never been a top-tier Vintage deck, but it doesn't mean somebody hasn't tried out the theory, right? And you'll actually find multiple instances over the last 3 years, 3 different separate instances of a publicly placing Cephalid Illusionist deck in Vintage, even the most recently 3 months ago. So you can actually check that out and see, oh, if I was going to make a port and bring this Legacy deck into Vintage, how would you do it? What would be the differences? And in this one, you end up finding out, oh no, wait, this actually isn't a Cephalid Illusionist deck. This is actually a Hulk Flash deck that has Cephalid Illusionist as the kill. So that didn't actually end up helping me. But maybe if we go back a little bit further to this one, Oh, how about that one? Oh, now here we go. This is actually a cephalid breakfast deck, and just ported into Vintage, and then you can find different ideas there. Oh wow! So Legacy, doesn't get to play Demonic Consultation, but Vintage does, and things like that. Gush and that kind of stuff. So lots of different tools you can use to answer questions. And what I'm basically trying to convey is most of the questions people have in terms of deck construction and deck building can really be gleaned from good searches on this tool. If you're asking for, how many of a card is being played, what kind of decks are being played, how do I play this card, those kind of those kind of questions all have prospective answers inside of the data, and you just have to go looking for it. So pretty simple, not that many, parameters to choose from. You're just looking at date range, sometimes player, format, and card. But even playing around just in card to do things like asking how many are playing 1, how many are playing 2, how many are playing 3. Simply doing those kind of things will help you narrow down your data to help you answer your questions. So hopefully this video makes sense. Hopefully this video was helpful, because it's a video I'm going to probably link to people all the time now, where if you have a question involving deck building, here's a tool that can help you solve it. Thanks for sticking around in this content. More vintage content is every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday on my channel, and other videos like this hopefully will be sprinkled in. Get brewing.